Well, hello everyone and welcome to Painless Universal Conversation with myself and Welsh. Today we're talking about how we empower women to get back to work. My guest today, who I'm super excited to have, is Vanessa Vallely. She will be telling us about her organization, We Are the City, which is an organization that helps women get back to work. And not just that, they help women in various sectors. Vanessa has a successful financial career in the financial world, and now she's received an Order of the British Empire in 2008 for her work on service to women and the economy. But before we even get started, let me tell you a little bit about Vanessa, why she's such an important person for Painless Universal to have the conversation with. She's an international motivational speaker, managing director of We Are the City. Vanessa is one of the UK most well-networked women and has provided keynote on a variety of career-related topics for over 500 companies worldwide. She's also one of the UK most prominent figures in gender equality and often provides guidance and consultation to both government and corporate organizations who are seeking to attract, develop, and retain their female talents. She was awarded, as I said previously, an OBE in June of 2018 for her services to women and the economy. At the height of her successful 25-year career in the financial service, Vanessa launched the award-winning We Are the City in 2008, a vehicle there to help women progress in their careers. We Are the City now has over 120,000 members and provides resources, conference, awards, jobs to women across the UK. Vanessa is the founder of the UK-wide Diverse Forum. She's also the author of the book, Hills of Steel, Surviving and Thriving in the Corporate World. And in this book, she tracks her success over the years of being in the corporate world. Over the past year, she's accumulated 20 industrial awards from Women in Banking and Finance Champions for Women, the Top 100 Racing Star, the International Alliance for Women, and many, many more. She's also the Pearl Queen of the City of London, a tradition that's been in her family for over 100 years. She's a board member for the Charity Research UK, Cancer Research UK, and one of its Women of Influence. I am excited to talk to Vanessa about her organization, We Are the City, how they help women, why did she think of starting this organization, and what next for Vanessa. Meet my amazing guest, Vanessa Vallely, as she shares her inspirational story. Well, hello everyone and welcome again to Painless Universal Conversation with myself and Welsh. Guys, as I said in my introduction, today's conversation is really for you out there. Are you thinking of how do I get myself really into that career that I truly want, or how do I fit in? My guest today, Vanessa, will be telling you just how she got started. It wasn't easy because if you hear her stories, it's really truly remarkable journey she took on. And let me repeat a little bit about who Vanessa is, because I always like to do this. Even though I've said it in my intro, I like to go back again. She has a very successful career. She's the founder of the award-winning We Are the City. Guys, if you don't know We Are the City, go check it out and see if you could become a member as well. Always click on their website. And she's done so much. She's an author as well. I don't know how she finds all the time to do all this. And she has been awarded the Order of the British Empire in 2018 for her work on service to women and the economy. Vanessa, thank you so much for joining us. How are you today?
I'm good, and thank you so much for having me, for all your lovely kind words. Yeah, it's great to join you. I'm excited.
I am truly excited because your background is, people see you now, but forget that before Vanessa became anything, she had a background that started from humble beginnings. And I'm not sure how you came from this humble beginnings to being this founder of this amazing platform, an organization you've created for women. a women organization to help women to really find their identity, find their voice, find their true belonging. Before we get into any of that, who are you?
So who am I? Vanessa Vallely, as you say, CEO and founder of We Are the City. In terms of where I started, I grew up in the East End of London, in the area of Dalston in Hackney, when, fairly socially and economically challenged area of London. We were kind of told more in school what we wouldn't achieve rather than what we would achieve. So again, quite a humble background, just me and my mum, but a lot of dreams, a lot of passion and a lot of support coming from her, kind of telling me whatever I wanted to be in life. Things might be a little bit difficult, but if you put your mind to it, you can achieve it. So I always had that kind of spring in my step. So I left school at 16. We didn't necessarily have any money to go to college or university. And if I'm completely honest, I didn't necessarily have the academic grades to do that. Mostly because around about the age of 14, things were going on in my home life where I kind of checked out of school. It was more important what was going on at home. So when I did check back in, I was a little bit late. And it was purely out of the heart of a number of teachers that rallied round me and kind of got me a few GCSEs, but it was never going to make me an academic at a university or anything like that. So I went off to the city, age 16, applied for loads and loads of different jobs, but I really wanted to work in banking. From where I grew up in my high-rise block, and again, no sob story, I'm so proud of my roots. Growing up in that tower block taught me things no university or college could have taught me. The value of appreciating people's difference. We was a community, when one mum ran out of money, the other mum would cook for the kids. There was a woman across the landing that used to plait my hair, and get me off to school. So it was everyone was in it together. So I've always kind of had that in the background, at how important that is, that sense of kind of community. So I went up, I applied for loads of jobs, and it was always a no, because it was a number of things. Academic record, obviously. I was applying to banks. There weren't many people like me working in banks. If I did get an interview, there was my accent. It was very broad East End London Cockney, slightly more refined at the moment, but not necessarily when I get back to the East End. I slip straight back into it, and I'm proud of that. And there was also an element of postcode bias, so I always say it was more conscious bias as to why I wasn't getting jobs. So where I came from. So, but eventually there was one bank that gave me a job, and it was the very bank I could see from the 18th floor of my tower block window. It was NatWest, and it was the tallest building in the city at the time. And I could see it, and I got a job there, and I was so proud. I put on a suit, first one in my family to work in a bank. I had a little briefcase that my dad had bought me, and, trotted off to the city. And that was my first ever job, working in the kind of telex department, where you'd put these Swift messages into tubes and it would go up through a suction system all over the building, because it was too many floors for people to run to. It was so exciting. I did kind of get fired after 6 months, but at least I got the job.
But when you look back now, I look back, I know I wanted to be in the financial sector, probably just because everyone said to me, that's the way you need to be. I'm not quite sure.
Money was.
Yeah, again, probably that's one of the reasons. Yeah. I was going to go into accounting and finance, and everyone said, no, don't do that, do investment management, because there's definitely more money in that sector. For you, what really drove you in that the financial service world?
I think it was the lure of money, if I'd be completely honest. As I say, me and my mum never really had much money. She was working, she used to work of a day in a print factory, and then we would clean 4 offices of an evening, which kind of explains why I didn't get much schoolwork done. But we needed to do that to make ends meet. So me going out to work at 16 basically took the need for her away to have to do those ridiculous hours. And the irony of that is that I've actually stand up and spoken in some of the buildings that I used to clean when I was like 8 or 9 years old. It's a very surreal feeling, but that's kind of what lured me to it. It was the fact that if I went and got a job there and I got my head down and, and I worked hard and always kind of had this attitude of whatever no one else wanted to do, I'd do it because it's the path less trodden. It showed enthusiasm and willingness that, sooner or later that I would succeed in that industry and I would get the money in that, to make a better life for me and my mum. I was that kind of that hope, if you like. So that's kind of what lured me into financial services. And then, roll forward, jotting around various investment managers, retail banks, investment banks, and just jumping through each job, just trying to build my network, and not necessarily initially, but, you know, just putting my hand up for all sorts of experience, and, you know, finding out that I loved it. And also that you don't necessarily have to be fantastic with numbers to work in finance, which was a bit of a, you know, something that could put people off. You know, there are other jobs that you can do, or when you get to a senior level, you put people around you that are good at the skills that you're not.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I read in an interview you did, I think it was at the Financial Times, you said you've always had a chip on your shoulder about not going to university. And I look at today's world, so many youngsters don't want to go to university. They feel that this is not their path. The social media will make them famous. Why did you feel that way, that you felt that you wanted to go back to university, to go back and study? And how did you deal with the issue?
I think, do you know what, it was a panel. I think that's what kind of kicked it off. I was invited to go onto a panel, and they sent me through the list of individuals that were on the panel, and they all had these letters after their names, and they had PhDs, and all of a sudden it was a stark reminder that no matter how far I'd come in everyone else's eyes, I was still that girl from East London that didn't necessarily have the same education as what everyone else. And I started to think to myself, why am I being invited onto this panel? You know, what am I bringing to the table? Not realizing there's a whole university school of life thing that I'd kind of been through. But so I think it was that. And I think also that I used to sit around lots of tables where, and there's a really interesting story I want to tell here, where other people, or my assumption was, that they were far more educated than me. Absolutely. Just a quick story. I worked for this gentleman, and he was the new kind of COO, came into our business, and we was doing like one-to-ones, get to know me, and I made a point of telling him I didn't go to college or university. And I know for a fact that he put me in a box. He put me in a box in terms of my capability compared to the gents that hadn't had that conversation. And it's when I was leaving that company, I kind of was speaking to gents. He was a great guy, but just through his own biases and stuff like that, I was kind of in a different box to the rest. And some of the guys said to me, why did you even tell him that you didn't go to college or university? None of us have been. And like his assumption was that his whole leadership team had that education. And it was just the fact that I'd made a point of saying it. So just a really interesting story. And also I'd spent months thinking, oh my God, these guys are so much more educated than me. And, you know, they've got business degrees and stuff like that. But in fact, they didn't. So yeah, just something around, I think there is a lesson around what you tell people, and sometimes the perceptions that can create, and how you harbour those assumptions as well. So yeah, if I could go back and myself, I would.
I think that's a good way of how you dealt with the issue, because even though it's something that there's a method of communication, you don't need to say everything unless someone asks for the information. Then you could do it and go ahead and forge, but you don't need to say, because you don't know, everyone else might be the same boss as you are, but because you were so honest. And typical women, I think women, we tend to do this a lot. We like to be honest. We feel the way we protect ourselves is by putting everything out there, just to not, I don't know, but I see that happen to a lot of women.
Yeah.
I have to ask you this question, because I remember being at university and I was always nervous. I always used to sit at the back. You said something very sweet. You said, one of the best advice given to you by your professor when you were sitting at the back of the auditorium, and the professor made his way to the back and whispered to you, are you always going to sit while other lead from the front? How did this message change your behavior?
You know, and again, it goes back to that point about that imposter syndrome. So when I went back to Chicago Booth Business School to do the Accelerated Leadership Program, I walked into that auditorium. Bear in mind, I'd never been in an environment like that. Again, my natural assumption was everyone was super educated in that room. I belonged at the back. That was my initial feeling. I was new, I was going to sit and I was just going to hide until I found the confidence to move my way through to that audience. Yeah. And then when the professor come and whispered that in my ear, I thought, do you know something? He's right, because I do belong in the front. I do have, you know, experience to contribute, and I'm isolating myself from the get-go. And it's funny because ever since then, I've always sat at the front. You know, I will make it a point when I walk into an event, I walk to the front, because his words have never left my ears. So yeah, a fantastic piece of advice, one that I've passed on to many of my mentees. Don't you dare sit at the back, right? You need to be up the front. So
No,
yeah,
that's truly a fascinating story because a lot of people, I think, they struggle with that identity crisis.
yeah.
And they go into a room and they just automatically, position themselves in a place where they're not seen, so that no one asks questions to them.
Yeah,
No one.
right away. And also it was like, so if he asked me a question, I'd seen like scenarios play out in films where the people at the front get asked the question. And I thought, so if he answers me a question and I can't answer it and I look stupid like in front of all of these people. Again, a lot of it was my own insecurities, if when I look back now, that were probably a little bit unfounded. I think everyone in that room treated me, they was really interested in my background, believe it or not, because it was completely different to theirs. So they was on a kind of journey of learning, but it took me a while to understand that, as much as I was taking that education, that I could also give some of that by being open and honest about my own kind of, my own background, my own struggles, in the hope that they would take that into when they become leaders, and that they would look for people that are perhaps sitting in the back.
I have to ask you, Vanessa, because this is very important for a lot of people who are balancing this two things. This is not the question here. We're balancing both. The key thing a lot of people struggle with is the lessons from like mothers who are staying at home, thinking, oh, I'm just a housewife. I'm not adding into society. I'm just a housewife. Someone who's not really done something. I mean, they've done something, but they've done it around the streets. They're very street savvy. They know the street more than anyone in any corporate job would ever know the street. They're so good at that. How do you tell people who have had those kind of background to find their voice again, to be able to go when they go to an environment, like if they go to an environment where it's a corporate world, to be able to give that experience, share what they've learned, like being a mother. That's not easy to balance the scheduling and all that, but to go out there and to find their voice again, as when a mother is looking for a job and not knowing how to find her voice.
Well, I mean, when I think back to motherhood, that's the biggest job in the world, right? And, I found that the hardest kind of thing to do. And I think the experience that goes with being a mother, you think about that and you liken it to what we do in the corporate world. Have you tried negotiating with a 3-year-old? That's one of the toughest gigs. The negotiation, the project management, the influencing skills, the financial skills. It's everything. As in terms of motherhood, resilience, the ability to balance so many different things. And I think that's a story that's very, very valid in the corporate world. So thinking about, all of those transferable skills, I don't think that anyone should deselect themselves because they've been out of the workforce. I mean, I know many of my own kind of friends that have been out for 4 or 5 years and they're like, oh, I'm worried about going back into the workforce. But there are so many like returner programs now, and the world is a mass with different skill sets for women to learn that are free and stuff. So even if they don't feel ready to walk into that room, look at some of the women's networks, like on We Are the City, for example. Look at some of the returner programs so that they can take it in their own time. But those skills, I remember years and years ago, someone saying, well, what do I put in that gap where I've been off on maternity? I'm like, you put in there hard work, because that's what you've done, whilst, managing your family and stuff like that. So I definitely think no woman should ever think they've lost skills off the back of having a baby. That's one of the toughest gigs there is. So going back in, holding your head up high and go, okay, I've done that. I've learned a lot. Now I'm ready to add something else into the mix. And again, there's just lots of the landscape is completely different for women in terms of the support that's out there virtually, and also for those on lower incomes to kind of go and learn some of those skills. So yeah, get out there.
That's good. That's very great. I didn't think about the influencing skill, the negotiator. I didn't think those things. We always just think you're just doing, and you don't realize you're not just doing. Actually, you're learning things, and as you go, so that's the actually skill set you're learning. You're an author. You've written this book, Hills of Steel, Surviving and Thriving in the Corporate World. And this book is something you wanted to write about the city, and you about starting your job at just 15.
Yeah.
And you worked your way up. And this is something really fascinating about you. Is that you started at 15. And you didn't just say, okay, I'm going to start assistant and be at that same level, like most people tend to do. They don't know how to go to the next level. But you worked your way up to the C-suite. What personal costs did this cost you for a woman trying to, start at this level and now get to this really senior level? How did you do it?
I think, it's a lot to do with passion and tenacity. I think when I was younger, I had a point to prove that a girl come from my background could actually make something of herself. So there was a lot of damn stubbornness there, and also that if I could do it, I could help others kind of follow behind me. So that was the first part. In terms of the cost, doing like some of those jobs, like working in investment banking and stuff where there were no kind of core hours. So if we had a job to do, you would pull the all-nighters, and there was a few tech projects where, there's one in particular that sprung to mind. We was putting in a new enterprise system, and it was kind of like selling your soul to the devil. You was there umpteen hours. I mean, I didn't see my husband, I didn't really see my kids, and that obviously causes issues within your relationships when you are so focused on your job. So carrying that guilt around that I wasn't there as much when my kids were growing up, and I didn't have a nanny. I had a childminder that would kind of flex her hours, and I always love to mention her because without her there wouldn't be this story. But she was like able to come in and like be there for when my kids were young. But I kind of look back on that now and I think, okay, you make the right decisions at the time. Do I balance the view of this really ambitious woman that still wants to kind of have a family? And were some of the decisions I made at that particular time slightly off? Probably yes. Because you just get wrapped up in this ball of energy where you see the goal. And I remember that off the back of this particular project that I was going to get promoted. That was kind of what was given to me. And I remember keep saying to my husband, I'm going to get this promotion. I'm going to get this promotion. I've just got to put in more hours. I've got to make sure I put in the FaceTime. I've got to be at that meeting. I've got to go to these drinks, even though I didn't particularly want to. And it was all about that kind of foot time at the firm. And I didn't get the promotion. And I think I write about it in Heels of Steel. And I cried all the way home because I'd rocked my own marriage as a consequence of that, hadn't seen my kids. And I think that was a bit of an epiphany moment where I had to have a conversation with myself around where are your priorities and what are those priorities. And sometimes just to stop yourself getting in that whirlwind of, I've got a really important job, I'm a really important person, when in fact I was probably no more important than the rest of the team there. But it was so close to me grabbing everything that I'd ever wanted, but as a consequence, potentially losing everything that I ever wanted. So I think that when I talk about cost, when, I've never really been this explicit about it, but kind of reading between the lines, that's kind of what it was about. And I think also the other cost was sometimes there were in meeting rooms that I was in where I started to question the world around me and the value that I added in that room when I could be doing other things that was for the greater good of society. So I think, I dipped out of corporate, I think it's 7 years ago, to go and fulfill a purpose with We Are the City and earn kind of a tenth of the money that I used to earn, no healthcare, the car got towed off the drive, and I sat there thinking, oh my God, what have I done? But that was the payoff for the cost. Do you know what I mean by that? I think as frightened as I was that it was all going to go wrong and could I go back to corporate if it did all go wrong, I knew I was doing the right thing. I felt in my gut it would work out all right in the end.
Yes, and it did. It did. It was hard. It did.
It's still hard even today. They say you get your 10 years in business, and again, because I very much lead a purpose-led business anyway. We're a commercial business, but if I'm honest, all the money goes back into projects that we want to do that we don't get sponsorship for. So it's not, as I always say, We Are the City. I'm never going to retire on a boat in Mexico off the back of this unicorn, but it was never about that. Yes. It was about the legacy that we leave behind. And when I look at my 1,000 award winners and the stuff that they're doing, we're like, they were magnificent long before we come along, but we've been able to play a tiny little part in that journey. And I'll rest easy as an old lady on that.
No, absolutely, because I think this is the balancing act for women, is that do you give it all to family or do you balance it? How do you balance it? But I have to ask you, how do men do it then? How do men sit in that room and find the courage to just take it all in. And we women always find this beauty out within ourselves. What is the difference? Is it the different because I need you
I
to
don't
help me.
know. I think we're wired differently, or maybe there's an assumption that we are. I've done lots of workshops over the years with men that actually, want to be at home with their kids, and they want that balance, especially when you talk to younger generations. That it's difficult with perhaps people from my generation, because we've all been conditioned, to work long hours, and this is a career, and you may jump a few jobs, but it's the job for life. And if you're in banking, you stay in banking. And I think obviously the world has changed over the last 10 years. So I think to make assumptions around what men are actually thinking in that room, I think it's shifting. I'd like to think it's shifting. It definitely needs to shift in terms of, parental. I mean, we've got laws in place right now for more parental leave for men to get more involved with their families. And I think the guys want to do that. And I think obviously there's not more talk now about the lack of women's voices in the room and intersectional women in those rooms, that the men are more aware of that. So it's been a painstaking journey, and I'm on that bus with hundreds of other organisations and incredible role model women and male agents of change. There's a lot of us on that, but this is systemic society stuff, so it takes a big old time to make that shift, but there's a lot of us on it, so hopefully we see change. I'd like to think in my lifetime, maybe not.
A little bit. I
I
think
hope so.
yeah, you're making great change. I think because when you put what you do with it, realistically, I think a lot of men also relate to it and they look at it. And these women go back and talk to their husbands, and I think that dialogue is starting to shape the way things are doing. People are starting to share responsibility, especially if women are working more. So they're thinking of having that conversation of sharing responsibility rather than just taking everything on board.
And we have lots of male allies, like we include the Men for Gender Balance within our awards. We very much give a voice to men on We Are the City. It's not about disempowering men, it's just about equal power. And also just making men aware of sometimes the microaggressions and, the sexism and the things that we experience in society. And I think, you always talk to the men with daughters and they say, we don't want to grow our daughters growing up in a world like that. So, there is a big change movement. As I say, it's just taking a while for it to bed in.
You have a very strong networking skills, which is unbelievable. I mean, for you to do what you do, you need to know how to reach out to people. And I think you're regarded as one of the most successful business person who knows how to network within the environment, reach out to various organizations, reach out to women, reach out to men as well. And how did you adapt as a woman in being a good networker, being able to talk to people, being able to relate to them? And what are some of your top tips?
Okay, so I don't think there should be any difference as to the gender of who walks in the room, but I do think sometimes it plays to confidence. I was petrified of networking. I remember being told by a boss, right, the clients are over, you've got to go and network. And I was mortified. I was like, oh my God, I've got to have artificial conversation with individuals. And it was only when I started We Are the City that I actually went to my first networking event. And I was stood there. I mean, my first 3 events, I'd actually walked in, got a water, put my coat away, got my coat, put my water down, and I went, because I was just felt so awkward. And it was a lady that come and stood next to me. And she said, I'm on my own. Do you mind if I stand with you? And I thought, oh, my life, it's that easy. And then I've just found this love of people. I love hearing people's stories. And then just this first, that's the only way I can describe it, of when I listen to somebody and they need help, it's like a matrix in my mind thinking, who do I know that can help them? And it's like a matching that kind of goes on like an algorithm almost. And I get such a kick and a buzz out of that. So it became a little bit addictive, and going lots really in the day. And then I think you do get to a point where your network is brought to you. So I've noticed that in the last 2 years, obviously none of us have been out, but people have been introducing me left, right and centre. When I built last year's tech conference, I met 120 people all over the world in a space of like 4 weeks from my sofa in my living room. So it shows that it can be done. And every person you talk to goes, oh, you need to meet so-and-so, so-and-so. So it is about investing your time in that. It's about a natural curiosity for others, wanting to help somebody, I think, and that also comes very much, what can I do for you before you can do for me? I think to always kind of have that mindset. So I think that's it. And then once you kind of, you get to know people and you start to kind of fix people in with other people, and you start to see magic happen. It becomes addictive. But one of the things I would say in terms of networking, obviously when we're allowed out, there are so many different events to go to, and it used to just be in London, but it's starting to be across the wider UK and globally. Look for a network near you. Doesn't even necessarily need to be a women's network. But go there, go with a friend if you feel uncomfortable, go, meet people, go as a two and introduce yourself if that makes you feel more easy about it. But go and hang out with different industries. So don't just go to a women in banking event, go hang out with the entrepreneurs, the women in space science, the women in nautical, go and hang out, have different perspectives. It gives you different conversations. And from a virtual perspective, this world that we're in, this hybrid world, reaching out to people, even, if they don't reply, it's fine, we'll move on, we'll talk to somebody else, but just reaching out to people saying, can we grab 5 minutes, or I'm a huge admirer of your work, not sure there's a need for us to even have a coffee yet, but would love to be connected on LinkedIn. There's nothing wrong with that, but then just keeping that connection. And then sometimes, like what I do, I might see a newspaper article and I'll send it to one of those connections. Oh, I saw this, I thought of you, just keeping those relationships warm. And again, just making sure that when you reach out for people, you're not just taking from them, you're actually offering to give something, because that's the best way that relationships begin. Yeah.
I think that's a good tip. It's that you have to have something, not just, some people have it in the mind, I just want something from you, and then you get that thing and that's it, not trying
no, it's not transactional like that. I never forget, I went to a networking event, speed networking event in the States when I was working over in Iowa. And it was a speed networking event, and literally this guy come up to me and he went, and you are? And I went, oh, Vanessa Vallely, work in banking, run We Are the City. Clearly that's not the answer he was looking for in terms of building his own network. He went, okay, fine. And off he went. I was like, I've heard of speed networking, but that was ridiculous. That was like, no, second, you're of no interest to me at all, I'm off. And it just made me think, that's crazy, right? Because I'd rather go to somewhere and spend, talk to one or two people and have really good, meaningful, connecting conversations than collect a whole heap of business cards that are based on nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you could go about collecting and having thousands of them, and not even one person that's meaningful to you. So that's a good lesson to take. You said one of the biggest lessons you've learned in life is not to take other people's opinions to heart. And as women, we tend to fall victims to this because we someone says something, someone criticizes us, we take it. But you just in your previous conversation statement, you just said, the guy was doing a speed date and he just left it, and you're just like, okay, it's just fine. You don't want to, I've given you my details. If this doesn't make sense, go, okay. But you didn't take that to heart. How did you help others to learn this lesson of not taking opinions of others to heart?
I think it goes back to when I was younger. There was lots of people that had opinions of me, and throughout my career, around things I couldn't achieve, or I'd never be polished enough for that, or I didn't have, the natural aptitude for a particular skill. And if I would have listened to them, I would have stopped trying to do some of the things that I wanted to do years ago. And sometimes it's really easy to listen to somebody else who's the voice of experience when they tell you things that you can't do. And sometimes there's no malice in that. It could just be a flippant passing comment, or you're not very good at that, or maybe you should focus on this. And you can take that or opinion as a tiny little acorn and grow it into the biggest tree in your mind, so big that you stop taking risks that would involve that particular skill or that would involve that particular thing. So I often say, like when I do talks with young girls at schools and young men, that sometimes the opinions of others is just noise, and you have to put your earmuffs on, because I believe only you know your true capability. If I said to someone, could you fly a plane? No, not today, but give me enough lessons, I'll fly the plane. There are some things that perhaps in a physical sense I'd never be able to do. Will I ever be a ballerina? No, I'm too heavy-footed. So there are things, knowing your own limitations, but by the same token, being the judge of your own capability. Actually, with enough time and investment in learning that skill, I could do it. put me with the right mentors, the right role models, let me learn, and I could do it. So I think that's what I mean by that, around sometimes, thank you for your opinion. I appreciate that, especially when it's from voice. I'm going to start with my own ambition, if you like, and my own belief system in myself, and come out with how I'm going to approach that.
You're very given in terms of your charitable work. You're on the board of Cancer Research UK and so many others. What motivates you to be part of this organization in terms of the work they do?
So Cancer Research is the Women of Influence campaign, which was a few years back, but there was about 15 of us that were part of that board, and we raised about £1 million for charity, but we also mentored scientists during that time, which was a huge honour. Charity has been part of me since I was a little girl. I mean, I don't know if your viewers are aware, there's a London tradition called Pearly Kings and Queens. Yes. It's a 100-year-old tradition, and that's been in my family for around 90 years. So I am the Pearly Queen royalty, an alternative royalty, City of London. So my grandfather was City of London, my dad was, and now I am. So raising money for communities and charities is, and you can find the Pearly Queens if you have a Google, but we basically raise money for a borough within London. We wear big button suits and big feather hats, so yeah, quite famous in London. But so raising money for charity has been, I was born into it. So as I got older and then gathered more kind of workplace skills and strategic skills, I knew that I could kind of contribute in a different way. So rather than just raising money for charity through my Pearly suit, rather than running marathons like I've done and using my running as a way to raise money for charity, I could contribute at a much kind of higher level. So that is really important to me. We are the city supports a number of charities. I do a lot of advisory to charities that want to access corporate money because I've been on the other side. But it will always be kind of part of who I am and who any of my businesses will. And I'm very proud. It's also something that's followed through to my children as well. So they've cut off their hair for various charities. My daughter's got MS, so she does a lot of work for the MS Society. The other one, even during lockdown, she was making hair scrunchies. And so I think it's really important that we bring up our kids and that us as individuals give back in some way. And that you may not necessarily have the funds or money, but we all have a bit of time, whether, it's volunteering, a skill for a charity, or your expertise. I think it's something that's really important that we all do.
I'm glad you said this, because you've been in the charity business from a very young age. You understand. Is it very difficult in terms of the distribution? Because one thing I find with charitable work is that sometimes the distribution doesn't really get to the key core people. How do you work very hard to make sure these people that truly need that resources get that?
I mean, you're quite right. When you look at some of the bigger charities and the overheads they have, the offices and the amount of staff, and every penny of that takes away from the charity's work in terms of research. I don't know the answer. If I did, I'd create a model and give it to the charities. But I think even I get frustrated when I get paper literature through my door for a particular charity. I'd rather that money going back in to support one of the women or the individuals that charity is supporting. I think charities need to relook at their costs in the light of the pandemic. What we've had for the last 2 years, there's much more cost efficient ways. We know that, we've seen it proven in terms of how we can all still function in a pandemic world. So what are the learnings from that, and how can they take it forward? But I wish I had the right answer to do that, so we could put more money to the core services that we're trying to provide. But it's one of those unanswered questions.
I have to talk about your baby. You launched We Are the City in 2008, a vehicle to attract, retain, and develop female talent. When you started on this journey, what was going through your mind?
That was a bit crazy. Here I was in the job at the end of a 25-year career, everything I ever wanted as that 16-year-old girl. I was kind of getting it. I was in reach of bigger and better positions. And then all of a sudden, no, let's leave all of that to build a website out for women about gender and about ways to develop themselves, when at that time, 13 years ago, gender was on no one's agenda and diversity wasn't even a term. You know, I remember, you know, we in journalism, they call it a slow news day. You know, we was lucky if we had one article a month, you know, to put on that website. And I remember Stuart and I celebrating, my husband, you know, when we looked at the website and 50 people had joined, we were like, oh my goodness, 50 people have joined We Are the City. And then we looked at who they were. It was my mum, his dad, my cousin. But I think it was the love of that. And then just also building a community for 7 years whilst I was still at corporate and never asking them for anything. We just built up a community that all we did was give them. And as more and more women's organisations popped up, you know, Lord Davies said more women need to be on boards in 2010. Firms started to look at this term diversity and, you know, where are the women in this conversation, and, you know, ethnic minorities and people from different sexualities. You know, I think we were prime position. We had this wonderful community. And then the corporate started saying to me, well, look, we need to attract, retain, develop female talent. Can you help us do that? So that was the signal for me to leave. I'd already written Heels of Steel, sitting on lots of panels and doing talks and stuff. But it was like, right, there's something here. I've got a peachy keen community, and I've got corporates here that are promising to change their ways to look after the careers of women. So how do I match them? So subsequently, you know, 7 years have been a long journey to get us to where we are. I mean, a client roster of 150 corporate clients who are all on some level of the journey. None of them have got it right, and they wouldn't mind me saying that. 5 years ago, we built out a sister site, We Are Tech Women, because the number of women in tech is 16% globally, 17% in the UK. So we've got this wonderful community of about 160,000 women. But for us, it's about collaboration. It's not just about what we do at We Are the City. It's like, organisation, look at the fantastic things they're doing for returnships, or look at this network, you know, they're helping women in insurance. So trying to be that mothership that says, look, come to us, we may not necessarily have what you need, but we're going to signpost you off to somewhere that can help you. So I've always got this thing, I never want people to leave our websites without another place to go, you know, or inspiration from one of the women that we featured, or, you know, an event that they can attend to upskill. So that's kind of all what we're about. And it's thanks to the corporates that have really believed in us over the years that worked to keep the site going, and also not to put it behind a paywall, because I'm not a believer that personal development should be behind a paywall for women. We have enough to pay for in terms of overpriced childcare and things like that. So access to development opportunities for me, whilst I'm at the head of We Are the City, will always be free. Things, I mean, there are things like conferences we have to charge for because we have massive overheads. But, you know, but by and large, I would say a good 80-90% of what we do is completely free content.
And when you look back now at this whole thing, this wonderful platform you created for women, giving women opportunities to find jobs, or opportunity to ask questions, opportunity to find events where they can network, like you said, because you know, the guru of networking. You know? How do you find your joy when you look back every evening and see the success that this company has created?
I get my joy out of the women, like our award winners and things like that, when I read their stories, and they're all over LinkedIn. You know, just this morning, one of them sent me through, she's just written a book, and she's one of our winners from a few years ago, Jazz Preach. She's just written a book called Brown Girl Like Me, you know, and I've watched her journey soar. She's just one of them, you know. Sonia Barlow, another lady prepared to entrepreneurs. She's just written a book. They're on television, they win Queen's Honours, they're creating their own little awards and their own women's networks. And again, as I always say, well, they were magnificent long before we come along, but we were a little part of that journey. And that's what I'm saying about the legacy, that to see those women continue to thrive. And I'll give you a real quick story. I was in Liverpool Street a couple of weeks ago. I was taking my dad to the hospital, and there was a lady that walked past, and she stopped and she went, your organisation changed my life, you know. And I didn't recognise this woman at all initially, because bear in mind, there's 1,000 rising stars, and I know a lot of them, but I feel like a mother with a load of children, right? So it's like recognising their faces. It took me a moment. And she said, when I won your award, things massively changed for me. And I've now got this job at this firm and stuff like that. And it's little things like that, you know, that you listen and you think that impact, the award winner whose, you know, grandparents recently passed away, that got to come to our ceremony to see her daughter, you know, her granddaughter win that award and get recognised. It's the little stories that you think, oh my goodness, I've got the best job in the world.
You do, actually. I love it. I love what you do, because it's really empowering women in a way that they've never been empowered before. Before I let you go, Vanessa, If you to do this all again, what would you do differently?
Nothing, because I think your experiences, even upbringing, jobs that I took, jobs that I messed up, every, ideas that I had that never worked, it's all part of the fabric of, of who you are. So there's nothing I would go back. I'd perhaps have a little bit more confidence in myself in places, but other than that, and think a bit bigger. But other than that, I wouldn't change a thing.
And are any words of advice of a young girl who's going to watch this program thinking to herself, look where she's become, look what she's achieved. I'm this girl, this little girl, and I have no confidence, but I want to be there one day. What would your advice be to that little girl watching this today?
I would definitely say it doesn't matter where you come from, it's where you're going. And you can change that pathway to where you're going at any given time. That's your decision to make in your mind. So see where it is that you want to go. You'll need people to help you along the way. Don't be afraid to ask for that help. Learn every day, be curious, and just see yourself. Visualization is really important in the position that you want to be, and access all of these free resources that are around you to get there. And don't ever be afraid to ask. If the answer's no, we move on and we ask someone else.
Vanessa, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. You couldn't have said anything else better than what you've already said. This is truly amazing.
Thanks for having me. It's been so lovely to meet you.
Likewise, I'm so happy. Thank you.
Take care.